Ever have dreams? This seems like a dumb question, but Neptune has a way of playing dumb when they're really a wellspring of information. By they, I mean Pisces, but maybe I've just had a few experiences like this with the people who I'd consider Neptunian. But back to the basis for my practice and for this series, healing. Neptune, the 12th house, and Pisces, they're healer archetypes for a variety of reasons. People who do healing work, though they learn to create boundaries at some point, know that they must place themselves in the position of the other. Without that element, what would they be? They'd just be judging people all the time. Can you imagine someone healing from having someone just yelling at them, "Hey asshole, why are you so stupid?" In regards to traumatic experience, once we've experienced something, as I've mentioned before, we can never go back. Practices like trauma release exercises, abbreviated TRE, maybe you've heard of it, are said to help with this, but they're just adjuncts to the full line of interventions we need if we want true healing. What are some of the methods that are said to work? Well, more and more experts in the field are saying that creative expression helps people heal from traumatic experiences. For instance, one practice I'm just starting to learn about is theater for survivors of trauma. Now, we've all heard of theater. Maybe we've been to the theater. Maybe we've acted in theater productions. I have. Some are calling this trauma drama, the methods that they're using to treat people who've dealt with trauma. The idea that we can recreate our experiences to make them go a different way than they once did, or learning self-assertion by recreation. The combination of these things are represented by Neptune. Neptune is also known as a planet of illusion. This particular choice of wording, illusion, it has a negative connotation, but it can play out in a variety of ways. Illusions are what allow us to be creative. One of the key characteristics of trauma survivors is that they start to lose their sense of wonder and imagination. They forget they can create new circumstances, and this can cause the other things associated heavily with Neptune. Forms of escapism. Drinking, taking drugs, cutting just to feel alive and a sense of control that everything will be okay. Seeking thrills. Substances will put you in contact with other realms and spirits. But what do these spirits want? Well, it depends on the spirit, but for instance, some of them hang around bars waiting for you to get intoxicated enough to creep into your aura and experience being drunk or having a one-night stand. And when you experience significant trauma, if you ever take the time to heal and clear your aura, or if you've done this, you will know that you have to clear your aura from negative entities because you develop holes in your aura. So that means that you're more permeable, and because of this, you won't have to imbibe anything, and you'll just be attracting these negative entities that see a way in because of your trauma. Think of the implications of this. You're without protection. To take a scientific approach, when you experience psychological trauma, in your brain, on a scan, you would see certain parts shut down. And these parts, we believe, can be rehabilitated with some intentionality there. But whatever it was you experienced, you could be attracting similar circumstances to you if you have not learned how to properly integrate your emotions experienced through that event. Spiritually, you could say that you're being shown the same events again and again until you learn to deal with them. The 12th house is not just the house of secrets, but it's also the house of dreams. Do you interpret your dreams? It's funny because I see dream dictionaries in the bookstore every once in a while, and I think to myself, I used to have a dream dictionary, but now I don't need one because I can just look it up on my phone to figure out the variety of meanings that my dreams could have. But when I was in high school and we didn't really have the internet the way it is now, I used to have a big dream dictionary that I would keep next to my bed, and I used to write down my dreams, and some of them even amounted to a few short stories that I wrote that I especially like. And what you might find when you use your dreams to channel some type of artistic work is that it's pretty deep without you having to really try. You're receiving messages and you're being receptive to those messages. And that's because the 12th house is the house of, I want to say, incommunicable messages from the spirit world. So they just download. They're not readily, available if you were just to share with someone in a factual type of way, but they can be communicated eventually. So I guess incommunicable is taking it a little too far. But as I start to illustrate Neptune, you'll begin to understand why I would use that word and what I mean. There can be a conscious effort to remember dreams. So, when you wake up in the morning and you remember, but you don't write the dream down, well, conscious work with the 12th house, with Neptune, means writing down your dreams, keeping track of messages with the spirit world and with your higher self. Because remember, you're a spirit too, just having a human experience. This is Bayou with Dream. Maybe you've heard the story of Cyntoia Brown. This woman has been through a huge amount of self-invalidating circumstances. I would consider her story peak 12th house experience, 12th house life experience. I would love to see her chart and see what she, what aspects she's had along the way and what her progressed chart looks like. And regardless, when she stood up to this 43-year-old man who solicited her for sex as a 16-year-old who thought he would pay to take advantage of her, she decided that she was going to fight back. Now, this is after she had prior traumatic life experiences as well. And so she was traumatized on top of traumatized, and then she went to court, and the court system let her down too and punished her for setting boundaries. And they didn't see the violence, the sexual violence that women have to go through as such. They didn't see that she was just protecting herself. And so now she's been in prison for many years. She was convicted when she was 22, and now she's 29, and she's been this strong person who has completed her college degree in prison, and she's a role model to the other inmates. And not to say that you deserve to be in prison no matter what, whether or not you're a model inmate or not. I feel as though, when you're imprisoned, especially in this country, there are some illusions behind the way that we put traumatized people in prison. Especially if you look at the story of Cyntoia Brown and you see it for all its nuances, you see that Cyntoia Brown didn't just wake up one day and say, hey, I'm gonna shoot somebody. She was through so much to get to that point, to be a 16-year-old and have to make that choice. And from what I know about traumatic memory and the mind when dealing with going through that type of an upbringing, your mind, it just doesn't have the same, you are constantly fight or flight. That's your daily life. And then when something happens to you, you are in this state of collapse. And so Cyntoia Brown, instead of collapsing, she made a split decision that she wasn't going to be taken advantage of anymore. And unfortunately, what did we do? We threw her in jail. And I say we, as the collective, broadly, because we're not, the US generally does not believe in prison abolition. But as we talk about Neptune more, why would we think about prison abolition when we're thinking about what the US system has become? And I want to come back to that. So, though this story is popular right now, it's unfortunate that the mass incarceration system of the US is filled with traumatized people who, because of the realities of our capitalist system, could not afford help, had no time to seek it, and found an out that turned out to be illegal in the eyes of the state. Now, I'm generalizing here, but the prison system is something that we have to think about. Mass incarceration is not just cut and dry, okay, this person's bad, they go to jail. It's just not like that. Drugs and any type of escapism means that there's a serious problem facing your reality. And the reason that I phrase it that way is that when you've been through life circumstances that you feel no one understands you, you don't have any help, you will resort to escapism as a type of existence. And it's just the way that this works, this life works. So why are we failing people so that so many are locked up when they should have been cared for early on, or could have been intervened with? Why can't we admit that the system failed them? That there are failed experiments in capitalism. And people found this system of prison was profitable, and here we are. So speaking of discipline, to change gears a little bit, Neptune teaches us to respect the liminal state between waking and sleeping. Not even just that, but Neptune in the 12th house creates a resonance, sending us messages. Sometimes I'm listening to my Pandora radio, for instance, and my ancestors will send me a message through a song that comes on based on my pervasive thoughts. So from a science perspective, if you can believe that dogs can sense your mood by smelling your sweat glands, but you can't believe that your spirit guides can know when you're going through something by slight changes in your mood and the messages that you're sending out all the time, whether you realize it or not, then you're mistaken. This is blah 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 with The Sea is Calling Me. Do you have any planets in the 12th house or Pisces? Where is Neptune in your chart? You definitely have Pisces and Neptune in a house. For me, I have Sun and Mercury in the 12th house. Astrologers would call me a 12th houser for that reason. I've always enjoyed being alone and I never run out of things to do. I love making art, writing, reading about topics that strike me. I can feel like I'm getting drunk off of music, which is hard to explain to people unless you know what that feels like. These are 12th house matters. Because I have Mercury in the 12th, it can also be a challenge to express the messages I receive and the ideas that come into my mind. It's troubling to me that in schools, though this is slightly changing now, teachers are not led to use different instructional methods to teach students. With a 12th house sun, I didn't like school at all until I got to college. I actually briefly dropped out of high school, but with Jupiter in the first house, I'm now a PhD candidate because I learned to have discipline and routine, which was hard, but I guess because I'm an Aquarius and Aquarius is co-ruled by Saturn, that maybe it did come easy to me. I'm not sure. But I have it now, and I've learned it over time. Well, what about you? Do you draw or sketch, write poetry, dance? These are all methods that let yourself be free and allow the 12th house to express itself through you. This is the house of your ancestors. They can speak to you here and help you with healing. Intergenerational trauma is also in this house. Generations of traumatic experience leave psychic imprints on us. This has been heavily researched by people. I think about Joy DeGruy's post-traumatic slave syndrome. This is a book entirely about the psychic imprints that American slavery has left on ancestors of the enslaved. What happened in your family? What's your family legacy? What legacy will you leave? It's only when we allow ourselves to have meditative activities that we're not constantly busied with routine that we can figure this out. This is Dee Yan-Key with Aimless. It is said that there is no I in the 12th house. The 12th house is the house of the collective. So you can see how this would be problematic for someone with the sun in the 12th. But consider someone like Madonna, who also has the sun in the 12th in the sign of Leo. She's always been able to tap into the 12th house collective energies in order to inform her art. The 12th house is where your boundaries can be permeable. But this is needed in the world because, as we talked about with incarceration, the pinnacle of boundaries, if we just lock people away, there's no opportunity for healing. But there are always ways to set boundaries with people that don't involve removing all of their humanity. A way that recognizes that they're on the same journey as you, while your journeys will look different and you may be ahead or behind in the amount of lifetimes, there's always ways to connect with anyone. And you could easily be put into somebody else's shoes. We're all human. In October 2013, the incarceration rate of the United States was the highest in the world, at 760 people per 100,000 people imprisoned of the national population. So while the United States represents about 4.4% of the world's population, it houses around 22% of the world's prisoners, probably higher now since this is statistics from 2013. Corrections includes prisons, jails, probation, and parole, and this all cost about $74 billion back in 2007. So how much does it cost today? Is this how we deal with things? We lock them up? Sometimes we do. Since the 12th house deals with identity struggles, it's also important we look at who is struggling the most with incarceration. People of color, those who receive injury to their identity when people deny them a place at the table. Poor people who cannot get themselves through the hoops of society, not for lack of want. It's proven that when you're poor, your faculties decline in a marked way unless you come upon special circumstances. Now this is generalizing, but look into the statistics of poverty and mental health. We lock things up in the 12th house and don't deal with them. Ancestral baggage, trauma, imagination for something other than the prison system, rehabilitation, recovery, acknowledgement of the work that's been done in psychology to discover why people react violently in situations. Money people with millions have to use in service is not spent at all. For instance, Rihanna, a Pisces sun, and Kim Kardashian, who has a Pisces moon, have pooled resources to help Cyntoia Brown, who I mentioned earlier in the podcast. But what could they do, and what could all people with that much capital do if they worked with someone to set up safe houses, women's trauma centers, counseling in low-income areas? What if they lobbied for more humane welfare policies? Much could be done. But by me generalizing, I am putting a blanket over certain things, and I guess that's not good either. But I'm at least using my imagination, considering a world without locking things up in prison, locking everything up in prison without dealing with them. What would that world look like? And I'm not surprised that these two celebrities with heavy Pisces influence would set up this type of precedent. This is Mindseye and Dr. Rinkel. Ignorance is bliss.
Ignorance is bliss. Nothing. You understand? Ignorance is bliss. nothing. You understand? Ignorance is bliss.
In medical astrology, Neptune rules the pineal gland and psychic healing. Pisces rules the feet, toes, the lymphatic system, and adipose tissue. So I think we should talk about the lymphatic system because it's this really important system of fluids in your body that's basically as important as your blood, but not many people realize that when your lymphatic system is stagnant because you don't exercise and get up and get moving, it can create really bad problems in the body. And so it can make it so that your lymph nodes get clogged up and you get sick. And have you ever heard of lymphoma? I mean, that is because of toxic lymphatic fluid and toxic lymph nodes. So the lymphatic system is something that you want to keep a close eye on, and that means that you need to do activities where you're getting that system of fluids moving in your body. Maybe yoga also is not, I don't want to say not strenuous because yoga can be strenuous, but yoga is something that you can do to get the lymph system flowing, and you don't have to necessarily go to the gym. There are lots of different activities you can do, going for walks, or if you aren't able to go for walks, just moving your body and using deep breathing to get everything flowing. Like I said, it's just as important as the blood, but it's overlooked, which, funny enough, is just the 12th house, you know? Something that is taken for granted. That's definitely a 12th house issue. And this is a house where you can develop mental illness. If you're too permeable without a solid sense of identity, if you're receiving messages from the ancestors and you're unable to filter them, you know, hearing voices, if you were abused and you have lost your imagination to create a better life for yourself, if you're defeated and cease to see yourself as a creative being and a precious being worthy of life, this is a 12th house Neptunian Piscean issue. Sage is the perfect herb to pair with Neptune because sage smudging, if you've never done that before, I would recommend it. It's where you have a bunch of sage tied together and you light it and you can move it around the house, and the smoke clears parts of your house where you bring it to. So sage smudging can lead the spirits out of your space. It can clear the bad wishes of others off of your body. It can clear negative interactions off of your body. And really that psychological setting the intention while burning the sage is partially what is doing it. You know, you are consciously thinking, I want this out of my space. I want this negative energy out of my space. I want this bad, icky vibe that somebody gave me out of my space. You're setting that intention. And sage also has a reputation for being a panacea, and it's represented with the scientific name Salvia officinalis. And this is derived from the Latin word salvere, which means to be saved. And the 12th house has to do a lot with martyrdom. You know, think of Christ as the martyr. You know, Christ would not have been a Pisces, but, you know, Christ would be a perfect depiction of a martyr, somebody who wanted to save all of mankind, according to mythology. Are you sleeping well? Do you have enough time for dreams? Sometimes I feel stirred at 3 a.m. and this is peak spirit time when the spirits are out the most, and I feel like I'm being called to meditate, so sometimes I do. Are you being called to meditate? Associated tarot cards with Neptune would be, firstly, the moon, which when we talk about Cancer in a future podcast, and the moon, obviously this would be the tarot card associated with it. But I think of Neptune as the waters pulled in by the moon. Neptune could definitely represent the waters of the earth because, again, we're talking about permeable boundaries. Think about, the separation between land and the water. Think about when there's a tsunami and the water just, it covers everything. It knocks everything over. You're not going to escape from water. I actually have a big fear of the water and the ocean, and I've had an experience where I've almost drowned. It's terrifying because you have nowhere to put your feet on. Again, it's just permeable boundaries. Everything gets sucked in there and taken away into the collective that is the ocean. And, so that would be why the moon card in the tarot deck could also represent Neptune in addition to the actual moon or Cancer. And the other one that is pretty specific to Neptune and Pisces in the 12th house would be the Hanged Man. So in the traditional Rider-Waite tarot deck, the Hanged Man shows a man suspended upside down from the living world tree. So the living world tree is rooted in the underworld and it's supporting the heavens. So given the serene expression on his face, it's believed that he's hanging on the tree of his own will. So he chooses to be a martyr. And a lot of us, we choose to be martyrs in situations, whether it be through our karma. We have this deep sense that we have this need to do volunteer work or charity or constantly be underfoot of our family members because of some past thing that maybe we had, some past interaction we had. But what we have to realize is that there's only so much that you can do before you become the victim yourself. So maybe you victimized somebody, or maybe you were unkind to somebody, whatever. Maybe you had your reasons to set boundaries or whatever it was, or maybe you didn't. Maybe you just flipped out and now you're trying to make it right. But there comes a point where you can only do so much until you start being a willing victim of that person. And they're no longer the victim, but they're the victimizer. So you see how those boundaries can also be permeable. So in the tarot card, in the Hanged Man, his arms are bent and held behind his back. So they form an inverted triangle, and he is wearing these red pants, and they represent human passion and the physical body, physicality. Remember we talked about in Mars, that's represented by red, self-assertion, but it's upside down. And there's a blue coat, which would represent knowledge, and yellow shoes, which would represent high ideals. And around the hangman's head is a halo, and that stands for his spirituality and the reasons that he is choosing to martyr himself out, right? And so when you see this archetype, you want to meditate and try to help break old patterns of behavior that restrict you and get back into your creativity. So also an interesting point to note is that the hangman's number is 12. And obviously we're talking about Neptune, Pisces in the 12th house. So that is another reason why the hangman so closely resonates with these energies. And think about the reversed position of the hangman in a reading. And that indicates the need to look at yourself from an entirely different perspective. And this is what the 12th house is good at. 12th house sometimes has a bad reputation because of the stuff that can come with it, addiction, imprisonment, these types of things. But it can also help you look at yourself differently. And it indicates that your life may be suspended for a little bit in order for you to recognize what needs to be changed in yourself. You're isolated for a time until you figure things out. And, this situation, just like in the card, it could bear fruit at some point. And it can represent a reversal of your usual way of thinking so that you can completely see the world in a way that changes things for you and for other people potentially. And here I am thinking about the collective again instead of just individual things, but that's just, I'm a 12th houser. So, think about the fact that the hanged man can be a willing victim and somebody who chooses self-sacrifice. Now, there is a time in life for this where you can sacrifice yourself, but there's also a time in your life when you have to recognize that hey, why am I being the victim still? Do I not want to live my life in a way that's fulfilling to me as well as other people? Why might I feel that I need to be a victim that way? What's in my psyche that's making me feel like that? And another thing that you should recognize about Neptunian energy and the 12th house is that the 12th house represents your time in the womb. So the houses in your chart represent the phases of life. The 12th house is your time in the womb. And imagine what that is like. It's this time where you're picking up energies, but you're still barely conscious. You're in this state where you are not quite incarnated from the spirit world, but you are a life and you're kind of sloshing around in there, and you're picking up energies from the people that are outside of your mom. You're picking up all your mom's feelings and thoughts and all of the stuff that she's going through. You know, you're absorbing her ancestors and your father's ancestors, and everything is just coming to be. So that's the 12th house, really. Those are the energies of the 12th house. And I think we need to recognize that we have to use these 12th house energies wisely. We can learn discernment without throwing out a huge part of ourselves, without throwing out our psyches, and without throwing out large populations from our society.
I alone remain.